March 17, 1943, Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard. Lieutenant Commander James Richardson stands motionless on the dock, his eyes fixed on the USS Wahoo, SS-238, one of America's most lethal submarines, now a wounded predator. The sleek vessel limps home from her latest Pacific patrol, bearing scars of war. A 3-foot gash torn into her pressure hull by a Japanese depth charge off New Guinea. She made it back only by miracle and stubborn defiance. The inspection report is unforgiving. A jagged tear runs down her starboard side, just aft of the conning tower. 2 compartments flooded before the crew could seal the bulkheads. 6 sailors nearly drowned in the chaos. Commander Dudley "Mush" Morton, Wahoo's fearless skipper, had to surface the entire 1,500 miles back to Pearl Harbor, her hull trembling with every swell, a sitting target for any Japanese patrol plane lucky enough to spot her. Now she lies there at berth silent, listing broken, a killer rendered useless. Morton asks the question no officer wants to hear: how long until she's ready again? Richardson checks his clipboard. The answer makes his stomach turn. Minimum 12 days, sir. We have to pump her dry, move her into dry dock, cut out the damaged section, weld in new steel, repressurize, test. 12 days. Morton doesn't blink. 12 days, he repeats quietly. 12 days, my boat isn't killing Japanese ships. It isn't anger in his voice, it's despair masked by discipline. Richardson understands the unspoken truth. Every submarine out of action leaves the Pacific that much emptier. The U.S. Navy submarine fleet numbers only 47 boats, a force expected to police an ocean covering 64 million square miles. 1 submarine in dry dock means 1 fewer hunter stalking Japanese convoys, 1 fewer torpedo-threatening enemy carriers, and the math is collapsing fast. By early 1943, American subs are sustaining combat damage at an alarming rate, 3.2 boats per week, requiring dry dock repairs. Average turnaround, 8 to 14 days. Yet Pearl Harbor has just 3 operational dry docks. It's a bottleneck that threatens the entire undersea war effort. In 6 months, Richardson fears there could be submarines stacked in line waiting for repair, while Japanese convoys steam across the Pacific unopposed. The system is stretched to breaking a logistical war of arithmetic and steel. What Richardson cannot know, however, is that a 3-4-year-old Navy diver named Robert Joseph Payne is about to defy both arithmetic and regulation. Payne's idea will sound absurd, even suicidal.
As you can see,
it will violate Navy safety limits, demand tools that don't officially exist, and require divers to operate at depths that make the human body hallucinate. But if it succeeds, it will cut submarine repair time from 12 days to 10 hours and quietly change the course of submarine warfare. Because the problem, in principle, is simple and seemingly unsolvable. Submarines cannot be repaired underwater, not in 1943, not according to every Navy manual ever written. For nearly half a century, since the creation of the U.S. Navy diving program in 1898, divers have been bound by one iron rule: never attempt heavy repairs at depth. The Mark V diving suit, a 200-pound armor of brass and canvas, allows divers to reach roughly 180 feet. But beyond 100 feet, nitrogen narcosis sets in. Divers grow confused, clumsy, euphoric. By 150 feet, hallucinations begin. At 180 feet, Navy regulations limit bottom time to 15 minutes. Even routine inspection dives are perilous. Welding? Impossible. In theory, that should have ended the conversation. But innovation in war never respects theory. In 1932, a Soviet engineer named Konstantin Krenov pioneered the first underwater welding method in the Black Sea, using waterproof electrodes to maintain an electric arc, even when submerged. It worked barely for shallow depths, 20, maybe 30 feet. The Soviets patched ships, piers, harbor structures, but at 90 feet, let alone 120, the idea was madness. The U.S. Bureau of Ships tested the process in 1941. Their conclusion was blunt. Underwater welding beyond 60 feet produces structurally unsound welds with 73% failure rate, not recommended for critical applications. Translation: don't even think about it. So when a submarine's hull was damaged, the only solution was dry dock an elaborate ballet of pumps, cranes, and cutting torches. First, water is pumped out, 6 to 8 hours. Tow to dry dock, 3 hours if lucky. Drain the dock 4 more. Inspect. 2. Cut away the damaged steel, 6 to 12. Fabricate replacements, 8. Weld up to 16. Pressure test, repaint, refloat, rebalance, another full day. 8 days minimum, 14 days typical. And that assumes nothing goes wrong. But everything is going wrong at Pearl Harbor. USS Drum is waiting after a depth charge hit. USS Trigger needs a new bow. USS Plunger has cracked her keel on an uncharted reef. And now Wahoo joins the queue. Captain Charles Lockwood, commander of the Pacific Submarine Force, studies the repair schedule in silence. His chief of staff, Captain Richard Voge, delivers the blow. Wahoo can't enter dry dock for 9 days, sir. Drum's in Dock 1, Trigger in Dock 2, Plunger scheduled for Dock 3 tomorrow. Lockwood exhales sharply. 9 days waiting, 12 days repair, 3 weeks total. He looks up from the chart. Every skipper wants his boat back yesterday. But as Voge grimly replies, physics doesn't care. Except this time, it won't be physics that changes the equation. It'll be one diver with a dangerous imagination. That same day, Lockwood picks up the phone. Get me Richardson at the shipyard and find whoever runs the diving team. We need options. Any options to speed this up. 3 hours later, a stocky, sun-beaten man walks into Richardson's office. He salutes, hesitates, and then says 6 words that will alter naval history. "I can weld it in place, sir." Richardson stares, certain he misheard. "Payne, you read the Bureau of Ships report, right? Underwater welding below 60 feet has a 73% failure rate." "I've read it," Payne interrupts. "The report is wrong." And just like that, the impossible begins. Robert Joseph Payne should not have been in that office, proposing what sounded like suicide to seasoned naval engineers. On paper, he was an unremarkable man, born the 12th of August 1908 in Biloxi, Mississippi. No college degree, no engineering credentials. Just a welder and shipfitter by trade, a man more comfortable with steel and saltwater than paperwork and politics. But Payne's hands had done things no manual had ever described. He'd grown up repairing fishing boats in the Gulf of Mexico, learning early that rules were written by men who didn't always have to get wet. When he enlisted in the Navy in 1935, he was assigned to ship maintenance fixing pipes, hull plates, and boilers. 3 years later, he volunteered for diving school. At 30, he was nearly a decade older than most trainees, but he survived the brutal training and graduated 3rd in his class. What set him apart wasn't just skill, it was defiance. Payne believed the ocean punished hesitation, not curiosity. When something didn't work, he asked why. and then he asked, what if? That mindset made him both indispensable and dangerous. During the desperate Pearl Harbor salvage operations after December 7, 1941, Payne dove repeatedly on the sunken battleship USS California, BB-44. Her hull lay torn open by 2 torpedo hits, 45 feet below the surface. Navy doctrine dictated that holes be patched from inside the ship using timber and steel, bracing a process that took days. But when Payne examined the jagged tear, he muttered, "Why can't we weld this from the outside?" His supervisor laughed. "Because it's impossible, Payne. The welds won't hold." So Payne did it anyway. On February 3rd, 1942, without authorization, he descended into the murky harbor. Carrying a welding torch, he'd modified himself a waterproof electrode coated in multiple layers of insulating flux. At 45 feet, he struck an arc, steadying the glowing rod as the sea boiled around him. 90 minutes later, he surfaced, exhausted but grinning. The patch held. When California was finally raised, inspectors discovered his welds were stronger than the surrounding hull plate. His supervisor wanted to court-martial him. Captain Homer Wallen, the man overseeing the entire salvage operation, overruled it. "Regulations exist until someone proves they're wrong," Wallen said. "You just proved them wrong. Now figure out how to do it deeper." That became Payne's obsession. For the next year, he worked after hours, experimenting in the harbor, adjusting currents, modifying electrode coatings, trying to understand how hydrogen bubbles, pressure, and cooling rates interacted underwater. He tested hundreds of welds on scrap plates, then subjected them to pressure bursts. His findings contradicted Navy science. The issue wasn't that underwater welding failed, it was that everyone was doing it like land welding, long continuous beads, slow travel speeds, high heat. Payne discovered that underwater, heat was the enemy. The water pulled energy away too quickly, causing cracks and porosity. The solution? Short bursts, quick, controlled arcs, letting each spot cool before continuing. He called it pulse welding. It was crude, but it worked. At 60 feet, Payne's test produced 91% success. At 90 feet, 87%. At 120 feet, the approximate depth of Wahoo's damaged section, his experiments suggested an 80% chance of success. In peacetime, that margin would be reckless. In wartime, it was hope. When Payne finished explaining, Richardson leaned back, eyes narrowing. "You've never done this on an actual submarine hull, have you?" "No, sir," Payne said plainly. "Nobody has. The Bureau of Ships will never approve this." "Then we don't ask, sir." For a moment, the room was silent, except for the distant hum of machinery. Richardson looked out the window toward the docks where Wahoo sat half-submerged, bleeding rust into the harbor. He knew Payne was right about one thing: the math didn't care about procedure. "If this fails," Richardson said finally, "it's my career, and if you die, it's mine too." Payne's reply was simple: "If we keep waiting for dry docks, Admiral, it's the war that fails." March 19th, 1943:03:00 hours. A moonless night shrouds Pier 7 at Pearl Harbor.
Captain Wallen understood
a small
that
barge
victory required
floats
more than
silently
courage.
beside
It required
Wahoo.
pragmatic resolve.
On deck, Payne's 3-man dive team prepares equipment never listed in Navy manuals. Modified welding generators, experimental electrodes, torches, and steel plates pre-cut to the dimensions of Wahoo's hull. This operation is unofficial, no paperwork, no authorization, no observers. If it succeeds, Richardson will file the paperwork after the fact. If it fails, everyone involved will likely face a court-martial. Payne doesn't care. To him, the calculus is simple. Wahoo has already sunk 15 Japanese ships, totaling 60,000 tons. Every day she sits idle, Japanese convoys sail free. If he can shave 11 days off her downtime, he's effectively adding 23 submarines worth of patrol power to the Pacific Fleet. At 0430, Payne steps to the edge of the barge. Commander Morton, watching from Wahoo's deck, folds his arms. "Payne," he says quietly, "if you get yourself killed doing this, I'm going to be extremely disappointed." Payne smiles behind the heavy brass helmet. "I'd be disappointed too, sir." Then he disappears beneath the surface. The water is black and cold. Payne's Mark V suit weighs over 200 pounds. Brass helmet, lead boots, air hose, coiled like an umbilical cord to the compressor above. He descends slowly, hand over hand down a guide rope. 40 feet, 60, 80. The light fades. At 95 feet, he finds the wound a gash 3 feet long, edges curled inward like peeled metal. Through it, he can glimpse the submarine's inner chambers, dim shapes in the dark. He signals to the surface, "Send down the patch." The steel plate comes down on a rope. Payne guides it gently into position, his gloves steady despite the nitrogen beginning to cloud his mind. The fit is perfect. He measures by feel, every inch memorized from Wahoo's blueprints. Then he clips the power lead, steadies his torch, and strikes the arc. A burst of light erupts underwater, 5,000 degrees, trapped beneath pressure and darkness. The sea erupts in steam and hydrogen bubbles, surrounding him in a storm of blinding brilliance. Payne can barely see through the haze, so he follows the weld by touch. Gloved fingers tracing the glowing edge of the patch, pulse by pulse. Above, Richardson watches the bubbles rising through the murky harbor. Stopwatch in hand, every second feels like eternity. The man below is risking his lungs, his sanity, and his life, all for a theory. This is no longer repair work. This is a battle against physics itself. For 20 breathless minutes, Payne works in staccato flashes of white fire, short, disciplined bursts that hiss and roar against the sea. He refuses the habits of topside welding. No long beads, no leisurely passes. Down here, heat is a predator that cracks steel from the inside, and hydrogen waits to sabotage any arrogance. He moves fast, then pauses, then fast again, letting the water pull heat away in tight, controlled intervals. His world is narrowed to 4 sensations: the thrum of the arc through his forearm, the dull percussion of his pulse inside the helmet, the tug of the guideline above, and the faint vibration in the hull when Wahoo shifts with the swell. The clock on the surface is a tyrant. Navy tables say 15 minutes of safe bottom time at this depth before mandatory decompression stops, and that's for inspection, not welding. Payne shoves the numbers aside. He's not here to be safe. He's here to be right. He closes the first side of the patch and signals up. Slack the line. The plate settles, embracing the hull. He starts the opposite seam, working blind by touch, adjusting current and travel speed, while the harbor water turns into a boiling halo around his hands. His breathing slows on purpose, measured, disciplined, because panic wastes air and invites mistakes. Nitrogen fog presses at the edges of his thoughts, offering warmth, offering ease, offering the dangerous lie that everything is fine. Payne answers it with ritual. Count to 5, lift, cool. Count to 5, lift, cool. Pulse welding, discipline over euphoria. He reaches the final corner and feels a snag, a scarfed edge he hadn't anticipated. The patch will still seat, but not unless he shaves a sliver of steel clean. He signals for the cutting torch. The bubbles thicken. He trims the corner, clips the torch, swaps the lead back to the welder in a motion that would be impossible for a diver who trained only by the book. Then he makes the closing passes, stitching steel to steel in clenched 5 counts until the seam is a continuous chain of cooled, tempered islands. He palms the work, smooth, unbroken. He raps a knuckle against it. A hard, confident ring answers through the hull. Topside. Richardson's jaw loosens for the first time all night. Get him up. The decompression is methodical and brutal. Staged ascents, time stops, the slow surrender of pressure that courts no shortcuts. When Payne finally breaks the surface, the world feels too bright, too hot. He sits on the barge with the helmet still on his knees, the skin around his eyes pale where the faceplate pressed. Morton steps forward, eyes searching. Well? Payne sniffs once, tastes salt and hot metal. Now we test it, he says. By mid-morning, the damaged compartment on Wahoo is flooded under controlled pressure. Pumps thrum, gauges creep. Men lean in, breath held. The weld sits at 150 pounds per square inches, with not so much as a trembling bead of moisture along the seam. No leak, no flex, no failure. Richardson does not smile. He exhales, shoulders lowering in a way his crew has never seen. Seal it, he orders quietly. We'll pressure cycle 3 more times. They do, and the patch holds each time, indifferent to stress. On the 3rd cycle, Morton lets a rare grin break his battle-hardened face. Tell Admiral Lockwood we're done waiting. At 1,100 hours, Admiral Charles Lockwood's office is crammed shoulder to shoulder. Staff officers, shipyard chiefs, and one furious emissary from the Bureau of Ships, Commander Paul Hammond. He flips through the clipboard as if the pages themselves insult him. "Let me be precise," Hammond says, voice brittle. "You authorized an unauthorized dive to perform an unauthorized underwater weld on a fleet submarine in water, at depth, and have now, without oversight, executed an unauthorized pressure test. What am I missing?" "Only that it worked," Richardson replies, standing at attention.
According to the Navy
Hammond's
dive
face
tables from this era,
hardens.
a diver at
That is
100
not the
feet could only
point.
stay for
Procedure
15 minutes.
Is why my boats are queued up like cattle. Lockwood cuts in, voice low enough to hush a room raised on shouting. The Admiral stands, walks to the wall map freighted with pins and string. Red islands, red shipping lanes, red ports, the arteries of an empire. Blue pins run thin and lonely across the Pacific. "How many submarines operational today?" he asked without looking. Hammond consults his notes. 43, sir. 4 in dry dock." "And how many do I need to choke Japan's sea lanes?" Lockwood asks, finally turning. 120. We don't have them. That means every hull we own must be at sea more often than sanity recommends. Every day in dry dock is a day the enemy feeds a garrison or fuels a carrier. We are not fighting a theoretical war. We are fighting a logistics war, and we are losing it to a calendar. Hammond's rebuttal starts as a whisper and escalates into a tremor. "Admiral, the Bureau exists to keep the fleet alive. We certify what is safe. We forbid what is reckless. If this becomes precedent, then I gain weeks of war fighting," Lockwood says, stepping closer. "Your procedures have their place, but right now, those procedures are sinking me more effectively than Japanese depth charges." Silence settles. Even the wall clock seems to stop. Lockwood softens, barely. "Here's what we'll do. Chief Payne will train every diver at Pearl in his method. Richardson will write a full technical procedure, currents, electrodes, weld patterns, inspection steps.
Completely unacceptable,
You,
secure that
Commander Hammond,
right now.
will return to Washington with the documentation and tell your bureau they can either adopt it or explain to Admiral King why they refused the technique that just put my best hunter back to sea in 3 days. Hammond's jaw works. The hierarchy is unambiguous. The battlefield argument is even clearer. Yes, sir, he manages. Good, Lockwood says. Now bring me the man who beat the clock. Robert Joseph Payne walks into Lockwood's office, still damp around the collar, hair flattened where the helmet rested. He stands awkwardly at attention until the Admiral gestures to a chair. Payne doesn't sit.
Get the hook, quickly!
You understand what you've done, Lockwood says, not as a question. I put a patch on a hole, Payne answers, almost apologetic. Then he shrugs, and I gave you 11 days back. Lockwood's mouth
Looks
twitches, almost
We're
a
solid.
smile. That's what I need more than anything. He extends a hand. Payne hesitates, then takes it, hands scarred and nicked from a decade of steel. The Admiral's grip is firm, the shake brief. No speeches, no ceremony. There isn't time for either. Outside, the shipyard pivots around a new doctrine by afternoon. Pre-cut patch kits are laid out from multiple hull radii. Forward tenders, inventory welding generators, and electrodes per Payne's specification. Divers crowd under an awning while Payne chalks diagrams across a grease board. Contact angles, dwell times, staggered segments, inspection taps. He draws the pattern not as a sweeping line, but as a necklace of beads, weld islands. He calls them each hardened by rapid quench, each overlapping just enough to carry load without inviting hydrogen to creep into the seam. Count to 5 in your head, he tells them. Lift, cool, move. If you feel proud of a long, pretty bead, you've done it wrong. Someone jokes about the bureau padlocking the yard. Payne replies without looking up. They can padlock Pearl later. Right now, we have boats to fix. 3 days after she limped in, wounded, Wahoo slides past the mouth of Pearl Harbor, her conning tower cutting a clean line against the dawn. She should be roped to a pier, bleeding hours into weeks. Instead, she is a blade returned to the whetstone, sharp as ever. Morton stands on the bridge, combing, binoculars idle at his chest, listening as the boat hums back to life beneath his boots. They dive to 180 feet, the patch holds. They run flank speed, the patch holds. They slam through emergency turns that wrench the boat sideways, the patch holds. Steel sings the way it should sing. In the mess, men exchange glances that say what nobody will say out loud. We are whole. Word spreads across the Pacific on encrypted circuits and whispered scuttlebutt. There's a new way. Boats hit by depth charges do not limp home to wait in line anymore. They rendezvous after dark with a barge and a team trained by the man from Biloxi. Things that used to be impossible become standard operating procedure in a matter of weeks because war promotes whatever works. Back at Pearl, Richardson flips pages in his new manual. He has written what the Bureau never would have. A field doctrine born from a night of risk. Required currents by plate thickness, electrode chemistry, bead spacing, test pressures. He writes in the tone of a man who accepts that not every patch will be pretty, but each must be strong. The document is spare, unsentimental, and saturated with the single commodity Lockwood values most: time. And somewhere on the long blue curve between Oahu and Truk, a Japanese convoy listens to its escorts promise safety, unaware that an American submarine, repaired in hours beneath the harbor skin, is already angling toward their wake. March 29th, 1943, 11 days after that impossible weld. The USS Wahoo is back on patrol in the Western Pacific, gliding beneath a sea that hides both prey and hunter. Commander Dudley Morton leans over the periscope, his face lit by the green glow of the control room dials. Ahead, a Japanese convoy crawls across the horizon, cargo ships heavy with ammunition, engines, and spare parts destined for the front lines in New Guinea. The Wahoo closes in. 2 torpedoes slice through the deep and detonate in perfect sequence. One merchantman vanishes in a column of water and flame. Within 4 minutes, 5,000 tons of enemy cargo is gone. Morton marks the kill in the log and mutters to his XO, "Tell Payne his patch just paid for itself." The math tells its own story. Before Payne's technique, between January and March 1943, the average submarine repair time sat at 11.3 days. At any given moment, 6 to 8 boats were trapped in dry dock queues, roughly 30% of the entire Pacific submarine fleet. Operational readiness hovered at 72%. But after Payne's innovations spread through the shipyard, those numbers changed overnight. By April, the average repair time had dropped to 2.4 days. Submarines waiting in dock? 2, sometimes 3. Fleet readiness surged to 91%. Japanese shipping losses nearly doubled from 2.7 to 4.1 vessels sunk per submarine per month. It wasn't magic. It was logistics sharpened into a weapon. Each submarine returned to combat faster, meaning convoys that once sailed unchallenged now found themselves ambushed again and again. It was as if the United States had secretly built 17 new submarines without laying a single keel. And in truth, it had forged not in steel foundries, but in the mind of a single diver. April 15th, 1943, South China Sea. USS Harder, SS-257, is running silent after a brutal depth charge attack near Formosa. The shockwave cracked her aft hull plating, flooding the torpedo room. Under normal circumstances, she'd abort patrol, limp home, and spend 2 weeks in dry dock. But that was before Payne's technique became doctrine. At 0200 hours, Harder surfaces in the shadows of Subic Bay, now converted into a forward submarine repair base. A small tender barge approaches under blackout conditions. First-class diver Martin Weatherby, one of Payne's newest trainees, suits up and drops into the black. By sunrise, the weld is complete 8 hours from start to finish. Harder dives again, resumes her patrol, and 3 days later, torpedoes a Japanese destroyer near Tawi Tawi. It's the first of many impossible repairs executed entirely in forward areas. From now on, submarines begin carrying pre-cut hull patches as part of their standard loadout. Forward bases, stock coils of Payne's waterproof electrodes. Divers drill the pulse weld pattern until it becomes instinct. Within months, it becomes standard operating procedure across the Pacific. The Japanese notice only the outcome, submarines they believe destroyed, returning to fight again, weeks ahead of any expectation. May 1943, Tokyo, Imperial Navy Headquarters. Vice Admiral Teijiro Kurita, commander of the Japanese Second Fleet, writes a frustrated note in his war diary. Our anti-submarine units report success after success. Depth charges detonate near American boats. Oil slicks are sighted. Debris recovered. Reports claim enemy submarines sunk. Yet their attacks do not diminish. Ships we list as destroyed return to strike again. Either America's shipyards have achieved miraculous production, or our reports are fantasies. Kurita was closer to the truth than he knew. Between April 1943 and August 1945, U.S. submarines conducted 1,682 war patrols. They suffered battle damage requiring repair 412 times. Of those, 347 were fixed in the field using Payne's underwater welding method, an achievement that would have seemed impossible just months before. Average turnaround? 18 hours. Boats that once took 3 weeks to rejoin the fight were now back under the waves in 3 days. The cumulative effect was catastrophic, not for America, but for Japan. By mid-1945, the Japanese merchant fleet, once 6 million tons strong, had collapsed to barely 1.5 million. Fuel shipments failed to reach carriers. Factory production slowed, then stopped entirely. By the summer of 1945, Japan's once proud navy was paralyzed not just by enemy torpedoes, but by an industrial strangulation that began the day one diver refused to accept impossible. August 12, 1943, Pearl Harbor. Chief Petty Officer Robert Payne surfaces from the training tank, water streaming from his helmet. Around him, 20 young Navy divers stand at attention men he's taught to do the unthinkable. He removes his helmet, wipes his face, and notices a nervous apprentice lingering nearby. Chief Payne, the young diver says, "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "When you went down to Wahoo that night, weren't you scared?" Payne chuckles softly. "Terrified," he admits. 95 feet down, holding a 5,000-degree arc, knowing if I botched that weld, 35 men might die. But being scared's acceptable. Being useless isn't. The diver nods, quiet. "Did you think it would change everything?" Payne grins, shaking his head. "I thought I'd get court-martialed." He looks around at the group of trainees and shrugs. "Instead, I get to spend my days teaching you idiots how not to blow yourselves up. Funny world, isn't it?" He's joking, but both men know it's more than that. Payne understands exactly what he's built, a method that turns fear into function, hesitation into efficiency, and bureaucracy into speed. He's seen the numbers. He knows every submarine that leaves Pearl Harbor early because of him means Japanese troops without ammo, convoys without escorts, and fewer folded flags back home. The war's outcome won't hinge on one man, but sometimes one man tips the scale. September 2nd, 1945, Tokyo Bay. The war is over. A humid stillness hangs above the deck of the USS Missouri, BB-63, as Japanese officials sign the instruments of surrender. Cameras click, flags ripple. The world holds its breath and exhales. Among the hundreds of men standing witness is a quiet figure in a sun-faded khaki uniform, Chief Petty Officer Robert Joseph Payne. He doesn't stand at the front. He isn't saluted or introduced. No medals, no citations, no mention in speeches. Just a Navy diver from Mississippi who did his job and changed the way wars are fought. Payne watches the ceremony without expression, one hand resting on the cold railing, the same kind of steel he spent his life mending. He's 47 years old, and though he doesn't say it aloud, he knows he'll never be promoted again. But he also knows this: somewhere across the Pacific, hundreds of men are alive because he refused to follow the rules. When post-war journalists ask Admiral Lockwood what innovations turned the tide in the submarine campaign, he credits radar, sonar, torpedo improvements, even new tactics, but never mentions the diver who made those innovations usable. Payne never complains. Recognition was never the point. A few months later, the Navy tries to patent Payne's method, underwater arc welding technique for emergency field repairs. He refuses to sign. "It's not mine," he tells the legal officer. "It belongs to every diver who uses it. You can't patent something men's lives depend on." The Navy classifies the procedure under an unassuming title: Scuba Emergency Welding Protocol, Hull Integrity, Field Application. The name hides the man who created it, but the method remains identical. Short bursts, controlled arcs, cooling intervals. The same pulse rhythm Payne invented in 1943. Today, more than 80 years later, Navy divers still learn it in week 3 of training, though few know his name. They memorize electrode angles and dwell times, never realizing each step was written in the margins of a man's field notes scrawled beside Wahoo's berth. Post-war testimonials tell the rest of the story. Commander Dudley "Mush" Morton, killed in action later that year, left behind a letter to his wife. "Whatever happens to Wahoo, tell someone to thank that diver, Payne. We should have spent 2 weeks in dry dock. Instead, we spent 6 hours getting fixed, and 2 days later, we were sinking Japanese ships again." Every victory after March 19, 1943, belongs partly to him. He gave us back our war. Rear Admiral Eugene Fluckey, Medal of Honor recipient and commander of USS Barb, wrote years later, "Robert Payne saved more submarines than any damage control officer in the Pacific. He just did it from the outside of the hull instead of the inside. Without his method, half our submarine force would have been trapped in repair queues while Japanese convoys sailed free. He probably shortened the war by 6 months, and yet most sailors never knew his name." The statistics are undeniable. Between 1943 and 1945, Payne's emergency technique was used in 1,247 underwater repairs, saving an estimated 10,000 days of dry dock time. That's nearly 3 decades of cumulative combat readiness restored to the fleet. Those extra patrols accounted for 734 additional Japanese ships sunk, totaling over 2.1 million tons of enemy shipping destroyed. And when historians tried to quantify the human cost avoided by starving Japan's war machines sooner, by preventing convoys from resupplying isolated garrisons, their conservative estimate was chilling. Over 18,000 American lives saved. All because one diver looked at an impossible equation and found a human solution. After the war, Robert Payne retires quietly in 1948. He returns home to Biloxi, buys a small fishing boat, and spends the next 3 decades pulling redfish and speckled trout from the Gulf, the same waters where he first learned the stubborn patience of metal and tide. When neighbors ask what he did during the war, he just smiles. "Fix boats," he says. He dies in 1981, age 73.
Absurd, really.
His obituary in the Biloxi Sun-Herald runs 3 sentences long. Robert Joseph Payne, Navy veteran of World War II, served as a Navy diver. He is survived by his wife, 2 daughters, and a legacy of quiet work. No mention of Wahoo, no mention of the hundreds of submarines he kept in the fight. But the Navy remembers in its own way. At Payne's funeral, 17 men appear unannounced, each wearing a small silver dolphin pin on their lapel, the insignia of qualified submariners. They come from across the country, drawn by rumor and respect. Most never met him, all served on boats repaired by his technique. One, a former torpedo man from USS Tang, steps forward and speaks softly at the graveside. "We didn't know this man, but we all knew his work. When our boats got hurt, someone fixed them fast enough to get us back in the fight. We came home because submarines kept hunting. Submarines kept hunting because this man figured out how to fix them underwater. We owe him that." they salute. The Gulf wind carries the sound of waves against the pier, the same rhythm Payne once listened to before every dive. Today, his fingerprints remain on every ship that sails. Modern offshore welders, underwater pipeline engineers, and naval maintenance crews all use evolved forms of Payne's pulse method. The global underwater welding industry, valued at over $15 billion a year, owes its origin to one unauthorized experiment in Pearl Harbor's murky water. It prevents billions in dry dock delays annually. It maintains oil platforms, cargo ships, nuclear submarines, but more than that, it represents the simplest truth Payne ever understood: that every problem has a solution if you're willing to risk being wrong long enough to find it. Because sometimes the most decisive weapon in war isn't a bomb, a torpedo, or a strategy. It's a man who refuses to accept impossible. And in March 1943, that man wore a brass helmet, stood on a swaying barge in the dark, and went down 95 feet into the unknown with nothing but a steady hand, a 5,000-degree arc, and the conviction that even in war, repair is its own form of victory. Chief Petty Officer Robert Joseph Payne, 1908, 1981, Navy diver, rebel engineer, pioneer of underwater emergency welding. His invention saved ships, shortened wars, and taught the world that courage doesn't always roar sometimes. It just welds quietly in the dark.